Hello, it's 42 Tribes, and this is part 3 of a series. This is part 3, which deals with Wikipedia. Part 3 is to say this. When people say, I said all of that to say this, that's what part 3 is. In part 1 and 2, and I'll refer back to part 1 and 2, but I don't want to do a recap, because as I refer back to 1 and 2, you'll understand why I had to do 1 and 2. This isn't so much of a recap as I just want to touch on some things that I might not have been clear about. In part 1, I talked about 2 conspiracies. This is the main one right here, the censoring of King Tut's ancestry test on Wikipedia, and it's mainly one dude, a few other people, but mainly one dude. The second conspiracy has to do with ancestry, DNA samples in modern Egypt. The fact that so many more samples have been sampled, I don't know how to say that there are more samples and actually released studies on those samples. There's more samples and results. That's something I covered in part 1. I don't really want to go over that, but I see that as a sort of second level conspiracy. First level conspiracy, what's going on with Wikipedia. I'm going to show all of that, tell you what you can do about it, and I talked about how, that's how you handle conspiracies. Amos Wilson saying that if you're just constantly into conspiracies, you'll feed unto yourself. And I don't want to do that. So I'm going to lay it out there and explain how you can do something about it. The second conspiracy, I sort of went over that in part 2. How if you develop a science base, a stronger science base, in your religious institutions, in turn and in time, you will eventually produce more scientists in different fields that are able to, and politicians that are able to cut through that second conspiracy. Also, you'll produce more people of wealth who can sort of lubricate that. Because someone made a point to me about how Afrocentrism has reduced the tourism market. Well, that's something that's going to happen. The internet also did that too. The 2 studies that are on Wikipedia right now, and that's why one of the reasons I did so much in part 1, is the Abu Sir and the K-Rat study. Not really sure if I'm pronouncing the second name as well. Sometimes I might pronounce L's like L's instead, or alleles like L's. That may be confusing with the L haplogroup. So be mindful of that if you watch part 1. I wanted to talk about Queen Tiye's hair in life and in death, but that may be, I don't know if there's really time for that. And I didn't talk about the 2017 sample in the Sudan. So that is something that's coming up. Hopefully. I mean, you never know what's going to be released. So that's one of the reasons why I have that. The second conspiracy is so many samples are not released, or in the case of the sample that Bioko discovered, it was just sitting on, it was on Khartoum's website, like the University of Khartoum. It was not given to the media. The media made nothing of it. I didn't realize that cancel debate, and I've talked about that cancel debate a lot. The debate with the Amarna squad, Sarasut Seti, and YP. Talked about that a lot, and even that, and I missed this because I just didn't think of it, but even that goes back to the whole thing with evolution between Seti and Akh. So even that goes back to the fear of death. And that's something I'll cover more in the future, but it's sort of outside of this topic. But since I mentioned it in part 2, I just wanted to throw that out. I was kicking myself for not talking about King Noble, because I mean, like, King Noble lives in the woods, and this was just a joke that I had a laugh at. If you're living in the woods, you probably can't wait till something jumps off. You have nothing to lose. So that's just something I wanted to mention, because even King Noble was not fill in the hole. Let's round up gays and kill them. Like, you know, and this dude, nothing really to lose. If we just had a giant sexuality war. So that you'd have to watch part 2 to really understand the context between that. But since I'm combining the videos into a one part, I'm not gonna assume that you haven't watched it. I realize that some people are gonna watch everything straight through. So let me get started on part 3. Well, I want to answer a question that someone had in the comments of part 2 first. Well, one more thing before I do that. I'm not done with the root. I was almost ready to apologize because you'll rarely hear me say I hate anything. I'm underestimating it. Now I'll do something separate on that. So stay tuned, subscribe to the channel. I'm starting to see what some of the people mean when they spread the quote unquote negativity on the root, or when they're bashing the root. So, but anyhow, the question I wanted to answer, someone asked, what ancestry tests would I recommend? The best ones are probably going to be African ancestry and DNA tribes, if you're African American, just because they have larger databases. African ancestry is expensive. So one thing you can do is, actually, I'm talking to them right now. I'm seeing if you can get a discount if you already have your raw data up. But one thing that you could see, I've never had an African ancestry test, so I can't compare. But of all people, I'd be good to compare because I could compare it to other tests. So I might do one. The problem is it's for each parent, tracking the lineage of Y and X for each parent. You know, if you're a guy, that's great. You know, but it's going to cost you $400, like $200 each parent. A cheaper alternative is for $250. You can get 23andMe. Take that data and run it through GEDmatch, and you can take that data and get an S&P test for $50 on DNA tribes. So for $150, you can hit up S&Ps hard. For another $120, you can hit up that DNA tribes STR test, and that's a good one because it shows who you are recently. And the only thing I could say might be better than that is African ancestry, which I haven't had. And if there are any others, let me know. But so far, from my point of view, having had 3, because I had 3, 2 from, well, really 4, 2 from DNA tribes because I had their S&P and STR, the 23andMe, and then really, if you run things through GEDmatch, you're gonna get like 6 of them. So they're not that good. They're better for people. They're better for Europeans, I'd say, specifically Europeans. Although EthioHelix has a decent enough African database to where it can kind of add some context and maybe substantiate another test. And it's fun. I like GEDmatch. With that 23andMe data, you can find out your health risk. And I'm one of those people. There's some anxiety, but I'd rather know. So, and chances are you don't have anything major to worry about other than the stuff you already know anyway. You know what I mean? For the most part, it's going to tell you stuff you already know. And if it tells you something you don't know, that makes it even more valuable. So I definitely recommend 23andMe, but only if you're going to get the S&P with DNA tribes. If you're doing ancestry. But just for bang for your buck, $150, 23andMe, 50, or $100, 23andMe, $50, DNA tribes as S&P tests. That's what I'd say is a bang for your buck. I definitely recommend that combination. Throw another $120, get the DNA tribes STR test, compare that, and then from there, African ancestry. Hopefully African ancestry drops its prices a little bit, becomes more competitive, because, and I'll update if I find out that if you already have raw data, you get a discount. So I emailed that to them a couple days ago, and they haven't had time to get back with me, and I haven't really checked. Time to get into it. First slide. I need to give a little bit of context. I'm not trying to go after Wikipedia. I realize that Wikipedia is a great tool. This is to, if they're wise enough to allow it to happen, this is to sharpen their tool. What I'm showing you here, this is the precedent for the type of companies and citations that are used when genetic information is reported on Wikipedia for individuals, both in ancient history, living today, recent history, everything. So for Emperor Chow Chow, you have Deniki's blog. Haplogroups of the rich and famous, 23andMe, that covers Warren Buffett. There's other people here. These are just some examples. Family Tree DNA, Adolf Hitler, Genghis Khan. It's like Family Tree DNA as well. For Oprah, Henry Louis Gates' book. I'm not even sure what. I think they use African ancestry. But for the citation on Wikipedia for Oprah's genetic information, it goes to Henry Louis Gates' book. Chris Tucker goes to Louis Gates' show. From what I understand, he's Mbundu Bamileke. That's something I was going to talk about. Might as well bring it up now. If you're African American, one of your top 5 tribes at least is going to trace their ancestry to ancient Egypt or the Sudan. Kush or Egypt, at least 1 out of 5. If not 1 out of 5, that's an oddity, because as you see here, Oprah's tribe does it. The Cabal, Liberia, I wonder if it even says it. Maternal, actually it doesn't mention it, but in another place it mentions it. And the Bamileke, Snoop, it just, and this is from George Lopez's show, and they reference the TV show. See, George Lopez tonight. This one references but doesn't leave a citation. This one left like a citation for the actual scheduled show. But either way, I think this is fine. Now, as you'll see with King Tut, they want everything in the book. Now, remember, King Tut's test is from DNA tribes, right? Before, there was this censorship. I don't know what else. This attack, and you'll see it. It's all in the archives. That's a good thing. This is one of those conspiracies where it's recorded. So it's going to look really stupid, especially after what I just showed you. So 2009, DNA Tribes has a genetic map on Wikipedia. Their S&P admixture results is cited. There was some debate, this is 2007, on whether they were a good source. In this debate, this dude, Dark T, argues that they're a good source because they've got experts working for them. Someone says, they say they have a problem with a commercial source, and really, it wasn't the source. But I could tell it wasn't really about the source. It was about the argument, because Dark T started talking about how your source is from the 60s and it's too old and all that. So it was Dark T and somebody anonymous. And again, this is 2007. So this is a year after the company came about. This is another debate. Really, it wasn't about the source either. Here, this was more about what they were arguing with the source. And one of the flaws in Google Slides is that you can't remove this thing. So a lot of this is new. They're working on that. That'll be a new feature eventually. So I'm just going to let it fall off. And right there, you can see the citation at the bottom panel for this up here. This was an example of where DNA tribes was cited, and someone didn't like that they were using terms like Germanic, Celt, and Norse. That they had created labels for the races of modern Europeans. Again, this is another example where, and this might have set this up, it's used as a source for European genetics. 2011, and this gives some context, and I'm sorry, I'm going to have to do a lot of reading. This is a discussion between Doug Weller and Victor Chamorro, both editors. Doug Weller is the main editor. He's an admin who has worked to censor King Tut's ancestry tests and Ramses III's haplogroup. In 2011, and this is one of the reasons why I did part 1, because I covered a lot of this, and I even covered some of it in part 2. Doug Weller was arguing to include the predicted haplogroup from Igenia when they predicted the R1B1A2 haplogroup that's found in 50% of European men. I talked about how in part 2, how it was based on a prop from a TV show, and the actual tests didn't even have the information that you would need, like the actual study that was released that's on Wikipedia, the study, the sample, not the ancestry test, but the sample that the ancestry test was ran with. That's on Wikipedia. The genetic data is on Wikipedia for that sample. Paternity relations, family relations are on Wikipedia based on that sample. People don't have a problem with that sample. And I talked about that in part 1, how it's verifiable. The Igenia sample was equally verifiable to be false based on the actual 2010 sample. It didn't have enough information to predict a haplogroup. And it definitely wouldn't have predicted R1B1A2 if it did. So all of this was verifiable, but Doug Weller is arguing to include it. So Victor Chamorro says, and I'm just going to start here because this is cut off sentence. Unfortunately, several major news organizations have fallen for Igenia's self-promotion story hook, line, and sinker. The claim about Tutankhamun's DNA is not reliable and should not be reported in Wikipedia. He should have went further and said, it's not even that it's not reliable. There wasn't enough information, like it's verifiably false. Not that it's not reliable, it's verifiably false. So based on something he said earlier, Doug Weller argues, and when did the Caucasus become Western European? Which, as researchers says, it's likely that King Tut and Europeans share a common ancestor who lived in the Caucasus region about 9,500 years ago. The article also notes, he's quoting the article, he's fighting to include something that is verifiably not true. It's as simple as that. And if he can't figure out that it's verifiably not true, then you have a problem. I don't know if he can or if he can't, but understand this is 2011 because, and this is a better picture of the DNA tribes population map that was on Wikipedia. This is another reference for a famous DNA for the International Society of Genetic Genealogy. And the reason why I bring them up, they're cited by Wikipedia. And ancestry test information for people, because I'm not sure who they cover, but I know this is related to someone's haplogroup is in this article. This site International Society of Genetic Genealogy currently has DNA Tribes' Wikipedia page on their wiki that they copied from Wikipedia before Doug Weller removed DNA Tribes from Wikipedia to help discredit DNA Tribes in effort to not report the ancestry tests, mainly for King Tut and also Ramses III, King Tut's family, the Armana family. So the International Society of Genetic Genealogy currently has the removed, and you can see right here, Doug Weller in 2013 removed this. This is an archive or a copy of another location, but he removed the distance map from DNA Tribes, 2013. So why is he doing this in 2013? All of this DNA Tribe stuff is old. And what I'm seeing, that's why I included this cartoon down there, it's a logical fallacy, the moving the goalposts, if you've ever heard of it. And what you have is contrived rationale, rhetorically spoken. Contrived, let me just kind of be clear on the definition of these words. It's not organic, it's just something that's like created on the spot. Rhetorically spoken convincingly, but not necessarily using evidence. And it ends up being stupid and dishonest. And this cartoon captures it perfectly, where you have a boss saying, starting today, the job requires a PhD. Feel free to apply for your own job. It's like, whoa, glad I have a PhD. You do? Well, the job also requires an Olympic gold medal, synchronized swimming 1992, and a posthumous Congressional Medal of Honor. And that's where it just becomes stupid and dishonest. If you know what the word posthumous means, it means you can't get it unless you're dead. And how are you going to work for something, have a job, if you're dead? And that's exactly what you start to see here with DNA Tribes. But this is the slick stuff, but it gets deeper than this, man. DNA Tribes released the Armana ancestry test, the one that included King Tut, the mummy most likely believed to be Nefertiti, Akhenaten, Amenhotep III, Yuya, Tjuyu. I covered all of this in part 1. I also showed how you can go through different population databases and compare their genes to populations and find out who they're related to. And I gave credit to the person who hit me to this and presented it out there so people could see it, because people aren't really talking about it. And one of the reasons why is it's being censored on Wikipedia. This is the DNA Tribes wiki that's on the International Society of Genetic Genealogy. You see, their wiki. They say right here that they copied it from DNA Tribes. Remember, this came out in 2012. DNA Tribes was removed in June of 2012. January 2012, removed in June. And you can see it's removed by a vote of 2-1. The universe's oldest majority. And that this vote, and they gave reasons that didn't even make sense. Like they had said stuff like, well, I only see that it's cited on New York Times and Google Scholar. Well, Google Scholar is a Google search. So if that means it can be cited in a whole bunch of other places. So I'll talk about that too. Who cites it, who reviewed it, and all that. And as you can see here, DNA Tribes removed by Doug Weller. So, or cited by Doug Weller in discussion. I'm saying he organized this. It may have been the sock puppet accounts. And this is why what I'm thinking is it goes beyond racism. I think there's some money exchange. Well, actually, I won't say it goes beyond racism, because the people that are exchanging the money are racist themselves. But I'm saying that Doug Weller, I'm not even so much sure if he's like that as much as he's like going, hey, I ain't putting this ancestry test up, but you have to pay me. But either way, it does, the list that you'll see leads me to thinking that there is some corruption going on. Like there's some money at stake, It's not just some the craziness that I talked about in part 2, where you got King Tut whitewashed every 5 years. Anyhow, this is what you see if you go to DNA Tribes' page. It'll show you when it's deleted. Here is that vote again, so you can see it better. 2-1. Okay. Now, this is where I'm going to have to start reading a bit of it to really cover what's going on. And this is interesting. It says, hi, you removed DNA Tribes analysis in an article saying it's not a reliable source. But on the other side, you left Igenia, which can be considered as a more reliable source. Let me just cut in, and I'm going to cut in frequently and say, the problem with this argument, why do you do this but not to this, is Igenia. The problem with Igenia is not that it's not a reliable source. So both ancestry companies, if they run ancestry tests, it's reliable. It's reliable for all those other examples I showed. It's reliable. You look up, if you're curious and you want to know about ancient Egyptian genetics, an ancestry company ran their genetics, then that's a reliable source for Wikipedia. That, if an ancestry company does that, the people that are searching through Wikipedia should see that. Now, if you have a problem with it, maybe you could talk about why, like if the company's brand new or something like that, or if the company has a history of bad tests, if they have a poor population database, if they're not verifiable by other companies, then let me see some hard evidence. The problem with Igenia was that they were not able to cite actual genetic information, only a prop from a TV show. And that TV show was different than the genetic information in the actual study. Decidedly different. Verifiably different. So that's the problem there, and that should have been the argument that this anonymous person is making. I think this is still the anonymous person. It says, indeed, Igenia, same type of company as DNA Tribes, reconstructed the DNA profile based on the film that was made in Discovery, blah, blah, blah. Tut has never been the Y chromosome of Tut has never been published, and the DNA profile displayed in this Discovery Channel may not belong to the Pharaoh. Indeed, according to Carson Push. Now, this is a good job right here. It says a geneticist at University of Copenhagen, who was part of the team that unraveled Tut's DNA from samples taken from his mummy and mummies of his family members. Igenia's claims are simply impossible. I don't like how he started it, because the problem is Igenia, you can tell Igenia's claims are simply impossible before you even get to a quote from somebody. But that he included that quote, okay, I see what you mean. And then the person kind of backtracks and says, you want to stick to peer-reviewed studies. The study is actually peer-reviewed. The analysis, like the study, really the sample is what they consider to be the study. So you have to remove Igenia as well. So 2013, they're removing the truth and fighting for the lie. And I say there because it's mainly Doug Weller, maybe a couple sock puppet accounts, and 2 other people. It's not a giant conspiracy, and that's one of the reasons it's easy for me to reveal it and give it to you and tell you what you can do about it. The first thing, you need to be sharing this video right away, because the whole point in doing this and why he did this is to miseducate people by telling them, hey, they removed King Tut's ancestry test from Wikipedia. It completely backfires his intent. Let's make the fact that they would do this more popular than the fact, than if they would have just left the ancestry tests on there, okay? But listen to Doug Weller's response. I haven't had a chance to look at it, but I was planning to. The issue is that Push responded, which might be a reason to leave it in. He says, I'm off for the night. That's what I'm talking about. Let me go back a couple slides. You see what I mean? How it's a lot like that cartoon, moving the goalpost. Oh, he mentioned it. That means something. Let's leave it in. Okay. Now the heat starts to, 2013, you've removed the truth and you're fighting for the lie, and people are starting to, push back. So Doug Weller is making an appeal to somebody. He says, I think we need some guidance on using DNA tribes as a source. I was reminded of it when it was used DNA History of Ancient Egypt. We use it in several articles, while at the same time the article was deleted as non-notable organization. Deleted by him, I would think, because remember, this is in June of 2012, and it's saying by Doug Weller. This isn't citing this little discussion from 2013. So it looks like it was deleted by him, that he hosted that whole thing. And he wasn't in the vote, but remember, it's 2-1. You can have them, they call them sock puppet accounts, and somebody just creates an account that they're controlling, or they have somebody else create it, like one of their homies create it, and they tell them what to do. Like, man, you got to do this. I'll slide you some money or whatever. So he says, I keep trying to remove it, but it gets reverted. And he's fighting to remove the damn thing. And he's saying it fails as a reliable source. He said, the Igenia source got media attention, but this one didn't, so it fails as a reliable source. Again, moving the bar. Now, there's some dude, Dr. Lewis, PhD, says effectively, I like the rhetorical talk, even when they're on the money and they're right. Effectively, the Ramses III and the 18th dynasty mummies analysis is based on those two published researches, respectively. And Doug Weller replies, those are good sources. Are you suggesting that that's a problem? DNA Tribes isn't a reliable source. We should use peer-reviewed sources, the exception being... Now, I already showed you. He said the exception being that if it gets multiple attention from the media. I already showed you a bunch of examples of people who was talking about Warren Buffett's ancestry test. That stuff didn't get attention. Who was talking about Emperor Chow Chow? Emperor Chow Chow didn't get as much attention as King Tut. Even the DNA Tribes test, that got plenty of attention, except for with the media at large. So he's kind of making a point. In the black media, to some extent, it's on you. Now, the point is, in context, not consistent with how they typically, handle DNA tests. You got Charles Barkley, there's no citation at all. Most of those examples, they didn't get a lot of media attention at all. So it's a dishonest, like I said, it goes back to moving the goalpost, contrived reasoning, rhetorical, stupid, and dishonest. Now, someone else agrees, says, hey, agree, we should, it's not only is it a testing company, but it's not a good one. Not a stellar reputation. Where are they getting this? And then he says, and he's restored it again. He even tried to argue that it's a reliable source. He knows about this thread and blah, 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 saying DNA Tribes should not be removed without consensus or completing dispute resolution. How can you complete dispute resolution with someone who doesn't want to put up an argument and say, this is again, January 2013. And Moxie agreeing, some dude named Andrew Lancaster also agreeing. But listen to what Moxie says, because this is also dishonest. Another example, DNA Tribes generally used other people's research data. Can we not find the same info from more reliable source? If reliable published sources do not include the information that is found in DNA Tribes, then that information is by definition not important enough to include or may constitute original research. I might talk more about what original research is. It's an ancestry company. You can't say they're doing original research for doing an ancestry test. Also, the data that they used is cited by Wikipedia, so they don't have a problem with the data. So what are you talking about? Like someone else has to do it? If that's the case, I talked about in part 2 how DNA consultants came with the same results. Well, different results, but based on verifiably the same information. Same information, different results because it was a different type of ancestry test. But you can tell by you'd have to go to part 2. I mean, part 1. But it has been repeated. I don't know if it was repeated in January of 2013, but the fact that why are they even talking about this? It's an ancestry company that ran an ancestry test. If this is Julius Caesar. So, but again, part 2 explains why you have this psychosis. How, because some people, if I were to just come out and say Wikipedia censored King Tut's ancestry test, you're going to have people who grew up in America where it's an industry to deny racism. You can write a book and make money. You can do lectures and get paid talking about how racism is overrated. So when people grow up in this world, you tell them that Wikipedia censored King Tut's ancestry test, and they're like they don't have shit to say. So that's why I had to do this. I had to go through the archives and break it down. And I ain't done yet. We're in 2013. So Anjara or something 1200 is another Wikipedia editor who seems to slowly figure out that something is questionable about Doug Weller. So it starts off when saying, I removed it. What are you speaking of? These are the 2 peer-reviewed studies in question. And Jara, I don't know if male or female. Probably and Jara. I would lean female. That's kind of feminine name. Sorry, I didn't see the edits where you remove DNA tribes. Thanks for your cooperation. So at first, this individual is cooperating with Doug Weller. Yes, I have started discussion on Wikipedia notice board regarding the use of supporting sources for this issue. From what I can see here, neither of these 2 sources attempted to conclude upon race of the kings, blah, blah, blah. This is an interesting text. It's from some dude, W.D. Ford. Any of the sources attempted to conclude upon the race of the kings in question and actually addressed a completely different issue. A non-reliable source then interpreted some data from the articles to support a different conclusion of their own. Is that correct, or have I missed something? Yes, W.D. Ford, you have missed something. First of all, who's saying it's not a reliable source? The same person that removed it from Wikipedia. Nobody else was saying this, right? But second, they didn't interpret it. They're an ancestry company that ran an ancestry test. And you can tell what data they ran it with. That's also verifiable. And they're not the only ancestry company to run it. So this person is in the woods. They're clueless. And, no offense to the elves or all the other people who live in the woods that aren't clueless. And Zara, I'm over here playing basketball while I do this. And Zara responds, have you been able to look at the notice board? DNA Tribes uses a supporting source to 2 peer-reviewed studies. I have started a discussion there just recently with some explanation on what the sources are doing. Yes, and my question stands, those articles didn't address race. This dude's an idiot. DNA Tribes didn't address race. They ran an ancestry test with the same genetic information. Like I said in part 1, this is these genes are I need to stop playing basketball. Concentrate. These genes are the child support genes. So you can run ancestry tests with them. And DNA Tribes does that. They've been doing it since 2006. So, and Anjara is kind of confused. I'm not sure I understand. What DNA Tribes did was run data available in peer-reviewed studies to determine the racial affiliations. Is that what you have an issue with? They're running the data in peer-reviewed studies? I think that is exactly what's being discussed. I respond to your point of argument, notice board, blah, blah, blah. So, and Jara mentions DNA Tribes have been used as a source on the following Wikipedia articles. And Jara and Dahara, I can't even pronounce that, does not put commas in her sources. I'm just going to say she. And that means one of them gets by, because Doug Weller sees that, hey, we're still using DNA tribes as a source in these Wikipedia articles. Doug Weller responds, needs to be removed from those also. So that's what I mean. They didn't just remove DNA tribes page from Wikipedia because they did an ancestry test on King Tut, basically. They went on, and I say they because it's mainly Doug Weller, goes on a campaign to censor DNA tribes from Wikipedia entirely. And it's all based on the results of that ancestry test. This person says, oh, instead of looking at it like, oh, we're using them as a source, well, shoot, maybe there's a good reason. I got to look into this. No, we have to remove them as a source. And these are examples of articles that were cited here where they're used as a source. In 2013, I think it's Karat study that produced the I2 haplogroup was released. Right away, this is reported on Wikipedia, and people are starting to say, hey, you're reporting this, why aren't you reporting the Ramses III's haplogroup? Which is a good question, because as I pointed out in part 1, Ramses III's haplogroup was reported the same way it was reported in this study. And again, you have people that are arguing that the study did not report that haplogroup. But I can show you the actual line in the study where they say his haplogroup was predicted to be E1B1A. It literally says that in the study. But going back, remember I said there wasn't cited properly. I did some little extra research, and here's 2 examples where DNA tribes is still on Wikipedia today. And there's more examples than this. But the interesting thing about this one is while Doug Weller was trying to censor DNA tribes from Wikipedia everywhere he could, there's certain areas where he missed because of those commas. But I also found out that some anonymous individual, you can't really see it, plagiarized DNA tribes. So Doug Weller, forget this assumption that an ancestry company or this baseless accusation that an ancestry company can do original research by performing an ancestry test. Original research, as Wikipedia defines, is in a yokel produces plagiarism. They turn this map, which is from an old 2008 DNA tribes map, all of these right here coincide with these locations, these population groups. That's why and it took me a while to find this, because when I saw this, I'm like, man, I've seen this before. I've seen this. That's the DNA tribes map. That's the DNA tribes map. And the place where I saw it was on their patent, and I'll show that in a minute. But that was the DNA tribes map, right? And I couldn't just take this picture because it was a copy. So I had to go into old DNA tribes articles and find this. I'm busting my ass. And somebody changed DNA tribes as a source to tribal DNA, which takes you to this page, which, no. Like you got it from here. You didn't take this and just create something that magically looks like this. Okay? This is plagiarism. I gotta play some Young Pharaoh. I'm done with Young Pharaoh, but I gotta play this.
Because they're literally taking a full breath. So why is this important? The African can never
Because that masterful research that you can't speak a language because you got a different accent. These are a little cut off because for some reason when I use this program, screencast, I zoom in too much. This is the peer review for DNA tribes as an ancestry company. This right here is their patent. This is an authority review because they had to push this by the government. And this is what I mean, where you'll see some of the math behind their MLI scores and their tribe scores, which are different. And okay, that's where I saw the map. That thing was in my head, and I'm thinking, I'll just do a Google reverse search. I'll find this. Man, it took me hours to find this damn thing. Hours for that one slide. And that's why I say, when I get hot, every slide is a mic drop. And now I'm hot. So I'm going to let this play. This is their patent. You can look at this as you will. That was reviewed by the U.S. government so they could be a DNA tribes and have a company. And it shows the math behind the MMI score. Thing was created by a Yale graduate. I think his name is Eduardo Valetitis or something like that. And right here, this is the peer review. And as you can see right here, let me start it again. I'm going to pause this one. You got reviews from 2017. Now, as I let it play, it's going to go all the way down to 2006. The person that's hosting all of these, and these aren't really reviews, these are ancestry tests, but it's done by someone who's reviewing how the company works, how the results of the company. That's how you host a peer review for a private company that has consumers. So here you have genetic genealogy, DNA testing, Charles F. Kirchner. That's this dude's website, Kirchner. The guy that wrote the book on genealogy, who's cited by the International Society of Genetic Genealogy, which is the webpage that still has the DNA Tribes Wikipedia up. Like their Wikipedia article, and they admitted they copied it from Wikipedia before Doug Weller took it down. See, as you can see, going back to 2008. So it's thorough. They, from the moment they became a company, the man that wrote the book on genetic genealogy was running reviews of ancestry test results. In 2006, it's been going on until 2017. He was allowing people to post it, host it, review it. And I didn't hear anyone say that their results came back and said that they were a squirrel or a bat or something like that, or even like much different than they expected. There were some surprises, you know how genetics is. And you're like, man, like when I finding out that I'm part Jewish, but then understanding the context for it. And I talked about that in part 2, really. Man, I swear after this, I'm about to go play some hoops. I love playing hoops in the hot sun, getting sweaty and getting under the fan, sweaty sex, shower, go play. That's the way to do a weekend, after working like crazy. I'm tired, man, but that's, that extra weariness and you sleep good. So it's the International Society of Genetic Genealogy. I think that's all I have on them, but I want to go in deeper on how prominent DNA Tribes is as far as how they're sourced. Here's an old review back when they were way more expensive from Infinite Health. Here's a review from Hub Pages, 2010. Here's a Better Business review. They got 2 negative ratings. They've been up for 10 years. They've been up since 2007, so 10 years. Then you have DNA Testing Choice. They did a review. You have DNA Test Reviews. Then you have My Secret Atheist blog. Some dude said that Connect My DNA recommended DNA Tribes. This is Connect My DNA. I'm just going through this. Like, here's another review from Find My Family magazine. BMC Medical Ethics. Their Biomed Central Medical Ethics. Biomed Central. They acknowledge that, or they cite DNA Tribes as an ancestry test company. This is DNA Tribes' digest articles. It's American Journal of Genetics. They cite DNA Tribes in a list of DNA ancestry companies. And in this list, they talk about their slogans. And their slogan is, I think, Find My Tribe. Providence High Tech News, who's sourced in Wikipedia, they reference DNA Tribes. New York Times, this is the one that they mentioned when they removed DNA Tribes. Like, yeah, it's been mentioned by New York Times. So what? Remove it anyway. That's 2006. This is Owerifo. He mentions DNA Tribes, and Owerifo has a channel on YouTube. I subscribe to Weirfo. Shout out to him. Some websites called like The Conversation, but they mentioned something I didn't know. Oh, that's hard to say. DNA Tribes is the only American-based company that tests for Australian Aboriginal genetics. It's Carolina Miranda, Times Magazine, 2006. So this was just ignored. References DNA Tribes as soon as the company is created. San Francisco Chronicle references DNA Tribes. I think this was like 2008. I'm not sure about that, the date on there. Phillips DNA Project, they've been around since 2010. They reference DNA Tribes in their FAQs. The Yale Journal of Biology and Medicine, you can see its name right here. They reference DNA Tribes, or I think they use DNA Tribes as a source, but either way, it's cited. One Cell, One Light. And speaking of Yale, like I said, Eduardo Villegas, the person that created that MLI concept, or the MLI statistical technique, was a Yale graduate. One Cell, One Light. This is an industrial toxicology company that's used DNA Tribes as a source. Remember what they're sourcing. That's going back to their journals. Family Heritage Research Community, they did a review. The Root, from the Hucklebuckish Media that I talked about, they did a DNA Tribes test and talked about it, the results on their website. Deniki's blog cites DNA Tribes articles all the time. They started doing it as soon as the company came out, 2006. They were doing it. And remember, Deniki's blog, they're cited by Wikipedia. From the book Undercover Asian, Multiracial Asian Americans in Visual Culture, DNA Tribes is cited. I'm not sure who the author is of that. Central Indian Journal of Historical and Archaeological Research, CJAR, cites or references DNA Tribes. The International Journal of Community Diversity lists DNA Tribes as an ancestry company. Cited by Nature.com for their marketing slogan. Oh, they were the ones that did the marketing slogan. So it was Nature.com that did the marketing slogan. Let me go back a little more. The American Journal of Medical Genetics listed them as a company that did autosomal analysis. It was Nature. It was Nature.com that listed their slogans. They just talked about marketing slogans for different genetic companies, agencies. Also referenced by Gulp, University of Gulp in Canada, University of Berkeley, California, the University of Tulane, New Orleans. Things again start to heat up. And in the top left, someone saying, I propose that as a first draft of a standard paragraph of DNA issue have included all the salient points but removing the OR, that's original research, and synthesized research. These are Wikipedia terms. I would suggest learning them if you're interested. And again, this is in the top left. And the person writes, recent DNA studies of ancient Egyptian mummies from both Ramses III and Armana lineages have claimed to have been found sub-Saharan African. This is actually what I'm going to edit back into Wikipedia. While this is uploading, this is similar to what I'll edit in, but I'm also going to mention DNA consultants, at least that part. And then someone writes, however, half the researchers in the DNA field dispute these conclusions and claim instead that DNA sequencing from ancient material is unreliable and prone to contamination. That is not true. That's completely out of context. That's from an article where one person says that there's concern by many that these are prone to contamination. Prone to contamination, and that right there is contaminated, two different things. E1B1A haplogroup is commonly found in sub-Saharan African populations, but is also present in North America Berbers, modern Egyptians, and Middle Eastern population. And this is WD Ford. He says, alternately, in order to better avoid synth, we can leave out the last sentence explaining what is haplogroup E1B1A, and readers who are interested can follow the blue link and read up on it themselves. Doug Weller says, I'm not convinced that it belongs here at all. Where do these discuss the Black Egypt hypothesis? I found it all too easy to wander off subject. This is why I think that he knows he has an element of power to lie, because he doesn't even tell good lies. Like, so somebody, Rod, you can barely see it right here, but he says, we should add a section on DNA and stop censoring the DNA tribe's findings, as we have no reason to exclude them from this article while allowing DNA tribes to be used as a source in various other articles. The rest of this first draft seems like a great step in the right direction. Now, remember I said that that person whose name I kind of have a problem with, Anjara, takes issue with Doug Weller, but it happens slowly. 2014, they escalated and wants to proceed with an ANI. I don't know what that is, but it's a type of escalation, which means you end up in the lavender box. And this person basically had seen enough, like seeing that my concerns as DNA tribes is being removed for being unreliable, but then ABO blood and chronological studies have been kept. I would think DNA evidence is more reliable. Studies that would ensure that blah, blah, blah is balanced. Just a little common sense. I would take it even further in the common sense and say, hey, it's an ancestry company that ran an ancestry test. We got to have this. We're the world's encyclopedia. We cover people's ancestry. If you go on George Lopez, then we have your genetic information on Wikipedia, so we got to have this. It's an ancestry company, and we've cited them to be damned since 2007. Now we're not going to cite their ancestry test. So this person escalates it, does this ANI whatever thing. In here, Doug Weller presents his case. And he says that the reason why Ramsey's haplogroup was removed was because it constituted research synthesis, and that DNA Tribes was not a scientific journal. So George Lopez's show is a scientific journal. 23andMe, same type of ancestry company, Family Tree DNA, Igenia, because they were using Igenia. And that is his argument. He says a study suggesting Ramses III's murder was during the Harem conspiracy was cutting off his throat. Unknown E is a possible candidate as Ramses III's son. Pentaware would be fine, but you are trying to use data in the article to prove a point. It's my understanding that using raw data from the scientific journal like this is disparaged. We should stick to the author's original intention and conclusions. In part 1, I circle the quote. They specifically say that Ramses III's haplogroup was predicted to be E1B1A. If the author says that like that, you're not taking the data, you're not taking raw data, you're taking straight up cooked data. Like that's what the person said. You know what I mean? So it goes back to that whole thing about how it becomes stupid and dishonest when you're moving the goalpost for contrived reasonings and just using rhetorical speech to fluff it. Now, someone starts to push back on the I2 thing. I don't really go back into that, but they mentioned that you're putting this in while you're fighting to keep Ramses III's haplogroup off Wikipedia. You're putting the I2 haplogroup in Wikipedia. And he's mentioning that this came from the period where they were occupied and invaded by Persians and Greeks. It's more recent. Like you're putting a lot on this, and you're also saying that it's Western Asian. When I showed the location of this haplogroup, it's mostly concentrated in Kenya. And then after that, Asia, and then from there it spread all over the place. And I say from there, but really you don't know where it came from, just where it's concentrated and where it is. Unless they're heavily isolated, then it's just common sense. Push it further, and somebody kind of jumps in and has their "can't we just all get along" moment or whatever. I agree with adding DNA evidence to the article. There have been numerous attempts by numerous editors to add this content, but it's constantly deleted, and it doesn't agree with the point of view of some. In most matters of modern life, DNA evidence is viewed as indisputable. However, as it concerns the race of ancient Egyptians, euphemism is a rule, and up is always down, black is always white, and left is always right. If DNA tribes had published the same results about any other topic, it would have been non-controversial and fit for Wiki. Dr. Lewis, PhD, pointed out the DNA tribes have been used as a source in numerous wiki articles without any discussion. To DNA tribes, we add peer-reviewed secondary sources, providing the indisputable DNA data that was made plain by lay readers for DNA tribes. Okay. I'm thinking this is 2014. Now, this is around the time when I started hearing about this, and it didn't surprise me. And this is someone who says that they're Alana 79 on Wikipedia. Is Samuel, I believe, is albino classified as white. Part 2, why I use that terminology for white people. Okay. Reason why I'm thinking that is Samuel asked some sort of out of touch questions. Like, I know that many black Americans feel close to ancient Egypt, but if they were around today, do you think they would agree with them? African Americans tend to be more liberal and voted Democratic. I'm just going to throw that out there. I'm not going to read the rest. American liberal and American Democrat, American conservative and American Republican are not the standard objective definitions of liberal and conservative. You got conservatives where you'll ask them, like, do you believe in conservation? And they'll look at you like you called their mother a whore. Just ideology. It's. And another example is the ancient Egyptians, and this is something I mentioned. I'm like, the ancient Egyptians didn't print money. American conservatives are all about capitalism. So right there, it's completely different. And I'm mentioning that because Samuel says that the reason why he didn't learn about the DNA tribes test is because it was censored from Wikipedia. People are still arguing with Doug Weller down here about using DNA tribes as a source. Yet DNA tribes is still consistently sourced on Wikipedia. Someone looks like Mr. Sativa is arguing like original research by whom? Like, what are you talking about, dude? And Doug Weller is just continuing to lie, talking about they're a private company, a non-academic source. And I don't determine whether DNA tribes is right or wrong. Non-academic source, even though it's cited by academic journals, even though Wikipedia cites private companies frequently for genetic information on individuals. Then you have somebody who doesn't know what they're talking about here, blah, blah, blah. But they say because his grandmother, Tiye, is from Nubia. Tiye is not from Nubia. If you're going to say that any of them are from the Sudan, they're all from Upper Egypt. That dynasty is from Upper Egypt. Upper Egypt is in the south. You could say that. And for the most part, you could say Tiye is his mother because he was inbred. So he only had one grandmother. And again, these are examples of how DNA tribes is sourced right now. And I started thinking, and I looked at some of Doug Weller's previous posts. This dude, he edits Wikipedia as a job. That's why I think there may be some corruption going on. He has so many Wikipedia edits. And I didn't really see much funny business. Matter of fact, I'll be honest. I think from what I've seen outside of this, Doug Weller is a decent editor, a good editor who's quick to chop down a bunch of pseudo shit. You know what I mean? I looked at it a different way, and I found that, yeah, there is a pattern to his racism. I thought, what's one of the most racist things I know of on Wikipedia? One of them, and I haven't really even looked to see what's behind it, but I might look up the history of circumcision. Circumcision, if we're going to be honest, came out of Africa because it's first seen in Egypt, and the Greeks said that it was done by Ethiopians back when they defined Ethiopia as a middle of Africa, just greater Africa. But Wikipedia makes it seem like Abrahamics by proxy of the Johnny-come-lately Muslims were the ones that spread circumcision more than anybody to Africa. Even though Africans and ancient Egyptians have the same type of circumcision. So that is sketchy. But another thing that's sketchy is how the Moors are portrayed. The Moors are hella whitewashed. And again, I cropped this poorly, but you can see that these are the type of images they have in the Moors. This isn't even there. And this comes from the same place. So that's sketchy. You got pictures of white Moors. You got pictures of melanated Moors. I know they don't like to be called black, so I'm going to call them melanors, melamoors. You got the melamoors and the albino Moors, and Wikipedia only shows albino Moors. It's only albino Moorish. And if we go all the way down, even this one right here, where you're like, okay, that's a melanated Moor. No, that's an albino Moor in the shadows. Doug Weller is also behind this. And people started giving him that work. They started saying, hey, I got some pictures. I got, history. We got Moors today in America. Like this is The Godfather, where you got Moors coming to America. When people say that African Americans didn't come here as slaves, so does The Godfather. Then you got this dude. There's a white version of the same dude, and they say he's like his partner. But when they show the black version of him, he's his slave, George Washington. And there's information, I forget the name of this dude, but he's portrayed as a Moor, with the red turban, red headdress, wearing both. You got the Moors from the 20s. So all the way up to now, you always have Moors in America. And people are telling him this. And he says, we can't use an etymological dictionary, because etymological dictionary talks about how Moor is defined as black or, dark skin, because they don't like to be called black. We need to stick to academic sources. And I'm sorry, we are a mainstream encyclopedia, and we can't suggest that there are Moorish people alive today. Now you want to play the mainstream, but you're stricter when it comes to genetics than the International Society of Genetic Genealogy. Again, dishonest, because hypocrisy comes with dishonesty and contrived rationale. I don't care how much rhetoric you throw in there that I'm white and I said so stuff does not work on 42 tribes. So people are showing him pictures and stuff, and he starts to respond that he's been to, he said he's been to Alhambra, and that they were Berbers and Arabs is clear. Nobody's saying they weren't Berbers and Arabs. They're saying that they aren't albino. Because we know that there are melanated Berbers. You can be an Arab or a Berber and look like this. And these are the type of pictures people are giving to them. Like, man, this is a painting from Alhambra, motherfucker. And one dude got mad. He said, you must be Jewish. Now, that's the funny thing is you hear people who are mad and racist and start accusing them of being Jewish. And you'll have racists who accuse me recently of being Afrocentric because some Jew put me up to it. Like, are the Jews behind the Afrocentrism? I'm like, no. I don't even recognize Jewish religion as being anything but fairy tales. So why would I, as far as I'm concerned, a melanated Jew is a melanated individual. An albino Jew is an albino individual. I don't really, strain through this whole Jewish conspiracy. To me, that's not the type of conspiracy I mess with. And I could go in deeper on that, which I will in the future. Because I know a lot of people, they're like, but man, the Jews run the world. I'm like, dude, are the Hebrew Israelites running the world? So it goes back to albinos running the world, right? But anyhow, and until the Hebrew Israelites start getting some of that share the power paper, then what are you saying? So this fool, Doug Weller, he starts selling wolf tickets, talking about he been to Alhambra, and then he even says that your insults don't really matter. And I'll move it so you can see it, because as someone that marched with Martin Luther King, it's clear that engaging in a discussion with you is fruitless. Dude, you march with Martin Luther King, but you're fighting to make these people who are portrayed like this look like these people who are portraying themselves as Moors by putting paint on their face and curly hair wigs on. You're fighting to depict them as how they look when they take the paint off. And you're censoring King Tut's ancestry test. You're selling wolf tickets. You didn't march with Martin Luther King, and you didn't go to Alhambra. I call bullshit. And I say wolf tickets because that's the old school European wolf tickets, when it was like, man, you want to see this wolf? It's not a regular wolf. It's a Lord of the Rings wolf. But I need 2 shekels and 15 farthings if you want to see this wolf. You see none of these pictures on Wikipedia. Okay? And I could show more of these. Like, I go on and on and on. Because there were melanated Moors. You know, you want to argue about who was more prominent, the albino Moors or the melanated Moors. Okay, but I know one thing. The ratio on Wikipedia is way off. 10 to 0 is not in the ball game. And let them tell it. The Spanish, they do their Moorish festivals, and brothers are out there with them, and they having fun. But when the Dutch, they get to putting them Afro wigs, and they can't resist jigabooing, and that's why I do this protesting. Because if you're gonna jigaboo on your own terms. At least that's what I think. He could be reaching. I don't know. But normally, like in America, when you see white folks putting on blackface like this, they're going to start jigabooing, and eventually somebody's going to have a whole bunch of watermelon juice on their face. And anyhow, I just want to say again, Wikipedia is a great tool because it'll give you the simple answers. And for things that are more complex, it'll at least give you some sources that you can examine. And the sources might not always be correct, but in general, they are correctable because you can become an editor and you can edit Wikipedia yourself. It's simple. You don't have to do anything to do it. You just basically have to be able to make a good argument. Now, there is some corruption. I've talked about that. But I'm also saying, hey, you gotta educate. This is a message to melanated people. So anybody, with really light skin, I want you to not listen to anything I'm about to say because it may offend you. And I'm not calling you a monkey when I say this, because this is an analogy. You can't complain that you have a monkey in your back when you drive by a monkey making factory every day. And that's the impression I get with melanated people when they talk about racism. It goes back to what Jane Elliott said, and I mentioned in part 1. If you grew up in America and you went through school and you weren't racist, you weren't paying attention, because we are in a factory, a conveyor belt that produces this type of racism. If you don't educate the albino, the Doug Wellers of the world will. You got to start educating the albinos that you live with in the country. Okay? You can open up your ears, light-skinned folk. I know you were eavesdropping anyway, so don't do that next time. If I say don't listen, don't listen. And one other thing. I read the Iceman Inheritance. The reason why I read the Iceman Inheritance is because philosophically, I knew I was going to disagree with it at its core. Now, in total, the book is ahead of its time. In total, I got to give it credit. It's ahead of its time. But I still would argue that albinos are not inherently messed up. You would not need all of this propaganda, this nonsense, this moving of the bar, if they were inherently messed up. And as you can see, right now, if you go to ancient, like if you search for ancient Egyptian genetics, out of all those DNA tests that I showed, the only ones you're going to see is a Chirat I2 haplogroup and the Abu Sair test recently. As this video uploads, I will change that. I will include the ancestry tests from the Armana family and Ramses III, his son. I'll include those other, the one that DNA consultants test too. I can't include the ones that I went over in part 1 from, like that would be an example of original research. Tukler's test, because it's not published. It's not out there for people to examine. I'd argue that it's verifiable. I verified it because you can look at that population database and you can verify it yourself. Maybe one day it will be published. Maybe one day we'll have a higher resolution test on those mummies and it won't even be necessary. And in a sense, the DNA tribes test is a higher resolution test anyway. Well, not really, not higher resolution, but much bigger population database. That's really about it. I'm just saying, this is what's there right now. I'll also include the DNA consultants test. I don't know if I said that. If not, I'm saying it again. In black media, I don't know if I have to hold your hand, but this is something you got to talk about, because you didn't mention King Tut's ancestry test. And the reason why you didn't mention it is because the other media didn't mention it. And too often you're holding coattails. Or the other media mentioned the lie. They didn't mention it strong. It was on TV in 2 places, I think. And only in one place took it down. Like, it's not on YouTube. And it was on maybe 10, 20 websites. The R1BA, or I forget what the haplogroup is for King Tut. That Wikipedia, and I just showed you in detail how they censored King Tut's ancestry test. That's a story. Wikipedia censored King Tut's ancestry test. Wikipedia takes down an ancestry company from Wikipedia to censor King Tut's ancestry test. That's a story. That is a real story. Let's hear something about it. Especially you, Rolly, cuz I'm gonna tweet this to him about 30 times, because you cannot drive by a monkey making factory and then complain that you have monkeys on your back. There'll be more on the route to come, but let's wrap this up. This is going on a little bit longer than I expected, and I want to play some hoops, either on the video game or on the court. It's weekend time. It's time to. This is what I'll edit in. This is how I'll edit. And I'm going to also encourage YouTubers, especially the Afrocentric YouTubers that aren't on some pseudo shit. And I know it's about maybe 1/3 to 2/3. It's hard to decide who is who, Join Wikipedia, become editors, encourage your subscribers to also become editors. Because you got to educate that albino. This and this is why you don't have King Tut's ancestry test on Wikipedia. And that's it. Because, and we can show you, go back to 2011, when it was R1, I think it was R1BA haplogroup, it was on there. And that was a lie. If you have issues with this, go back to part 1. I show everything about this. I go to the genes that produce this and show where they're located in modern populations. So there should be no question about its validity, how it works, or anything. I encourage you, Join Wikipedia. Educate your albinos. And I'm not saying educate them about stuff that they can learn in school. Educate them about you. Because right now, man, you're living with a generation that's been indoctrinated hard. And a lot of it's lies of omission. And this is an example of a lie of omission. One thing about African-centered scholars is they will correct themselves. Some of them are pseudo, but they're constantly trying to sharpen their information. It was, I think, Asar Amenhotep that corrected Diop about Kemet not being the land of black people. Lord Abba, he says something that isn't correct about the Moors. Shabazz is there to correct it. Young Pharaoh say something that ain't true. Amun-Ra Squad, Shaka Amos, YK the Truth, they there to correct it. He say something about the Anunnaki. People start talking about the Anunnaki again, go back to that Anunnaki stuff, and there's people that are like, hey, let's keep it real. People are always trying to correct Clyde Winters. Sometimes I would say even going too far. Zion, not to be confused with Lex Vortex. Lex Zion, write a book. The Dagger Squad reviews it, corrects it. You have all of that. Get on Wikipedia. I want to see Lord Abba on Wikipedia challenging Doug Weller. Show me that. And then Shabazz there to say, hey, you going too far, Lord Abba. Let's have some debates, and the results of the debates, that's how you update Wikipedia. Okay? But some things should not be up for debate. If an ancestry company runs an ancestry test, what is there to debate about? Now, if you have a problem with the sample, maybe. But Wikipedia doesn't have a problem with the sample. And I don't know if I really went into it, but some people have made the claim, and this sample or the Abu Sir sample are possibly contaminated. Well, there's no way this can be contaminated. And I talked about that in part 1. Because it was bone biopsied and it showed incest. So unless there's a bone marrow transplant by like some incestual family, that's not going to happen. So that's one way you can verify easily that it's not contaminated. The Abu Sir test, I don't think is contaminated. But I will say this. The people that did the Abu Sir test, I think they're competent when it comes to getting samples. I have a whole bunch of other issues, but I'll give them that. They're competent at avoiding contamination when they want to, because they messed up one of the Nefertiti samples, and I'm skeptical about that. When you're dealing with a test that's compared to Natufians, why are you comparing them to, shouldn't you be comparing them to ancient populations in the Nile Valley first? So it's the population that they've compared it to is weak, number one. But also that it is strong Natufian. Remember, Natufians, I say remember, but I don't know if you know, Natufians are usually, and I don't really get down too much in oid science, but they're usually considered to be more African-looking people. And if these were actual white people as far as their pigment genes, we would have had their entire pigment portfolio, because 3 of the Abu Sir mummies had their entire genome mapped. So we had one of their pigment genes. We would have had all of it, man. If we're talking about somebody who would be predicted as red hair or blonde, we'd have all of that. Based on that, I think it's likely that these are 1, melanated people. 2, they looked more like Africans, but more related genetically to a population that was more outside of Africa or very Northeast Africa. Well, the thing is, we don't know yet, because the people that perform the study, even though I credit them for being able to avoid contamination when they want to, and I question how selective they are in what they release, they're not that good at population analysis. So they've released raw data. We're going to see a much better analysis on that raw data coming forth. Okay? We'll see. Time will tell more. It's a new sample. And like I said, this sample, you're not going to have bone marrow transplants from incestuous families. This is real. This is real. Okay? So I just wanted to end it there. And I want to give John Garang the last word. I know it's custom to ask the ancestors to speak. John Garang died in a helicopter crash. Be it that he's Dinka, he's ancestral to a lot of people, you know. So both literally and culturally. But in this case, I would rather give him the last word. 42 tribes out. Time to go play some hoops.
Which is very much interconnected with the Sudan. We have a long history. Peoples and kingdoms have lived, thrived, and disappeared in the geographical area now that constitutes the present Sudan. Yet, and despite all this wealth of historical evidence, the present and previous rulers in Khartoum present a false picture of our country, as if the Sudan started with them, and as if the history and reality of the Sudan consists only of specific parameters, Arabism and Islamism. We are much bigger than that. Our contention in the SPLM is that the Sudan belongs to all the peoples that now inhabit the country, and its history, its diversity, and its and richness is the common heritage of all the Sudanese people.